Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Let's talk a little bit about Concord and why it failed. This game has been the hot topic on my streams for the last couple of weeks, and for very good reason. It is possibly the biggest flop in the history of gaming, maybe in the history of all mass media ever. I've seen the budget be up to $200 million and the development time up to 8 years, including like the pre-development phase, for it to launch and then be taken offline just a couple of hours ago. I think it was online for about 2 weeks. Everybody got refunded. It has been nuked. The game is gone. So what happened? I'd like to give a couple of reasons as I see it as to why it failed. The obvious ones are going to be some kind of intersection with woke politics or diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I want to go a layer, at least one layer deeper than that. So I have three big reasons. The first one is the visuals, that is the graphics. The truth is, graphics matter. Let's take a look at them. But graphics matter in a way that gamers don't often talk about. A lot of times graphics are discussed in the gaming sphere in quantitative terms. How many polygons are on screen? That used to be a way that we would measure it way back in the day. Now most of the time you don't hear about how many triangles are on the screen, but you hear like the resolution of the textures, the render resolution, things like reflections, things like ray tracing. All of these technologies that produce the graphics get discussed instead of how things actually look. What's the qualitative assessment of the graphics? What's the qualitative assessment of the visuals? And in my opinion, they are really, really bad. And I think there's no worse place to look than the characters. This is a hero shooter, so the character designs are really important to get the players interested in playing as these characters, as well as maybe buying skins. So the monetization strategy heavily points to what they did for the character design. And these characters are really all over the place and really, really bad. There's no rhyme. There's no reason to them. There's no harmony to any of the visuals that you are going to see from Concord. And I think it actually gets worse than this. Like if you look at an obese character, you're like, okay, there's the woke stuff creeping in, is that we have this androgynous obese character. But if you look at the colors that are on her, there's something worse that's happening, which is a low skill execution of those graphics. Everything is mixed with white. Notice that the colors are really bright, but they're all pastel. They're all in a, not a desaturated, but a mixed with white state. So they end up coming off as pastels for every single character. Every single character is wearing some kind of pastel. Things are not bright and contrasted. There's not a lot of contrast with all of these characters. And if I look at them, what they really look like to me is somebody designed them from the comic book industry. They designed them as a two-dimensional sketch of a comic book character, and then somebody was tasked with making that thing into a 3D object. You should have learned from most superhero movies that 2D designs, those designs that looked good way back in the 1960s in a comic book format with lots of small panels and bright colors, don't necessarily translate well to the 3D space where we're seeing a human draped in those costumes. So lots of costumes get modified for screen for very good reason. And that's because if we were to have a fully saturated red and blue Spider-Man, he might look a little bit weird. If we were to see, now of course we have Wolverine finally in his yellow costume, but there's still a lot of modifications to make that costume look appropriate for a three-dimensional object that is a human being in them. And these are supposed to be photorealistic people. These designs just don't work well for that, okay? The colors are off. The clothes are just a bizarre mismatch of everything imaginable. There's too many colors on every character. You notice if you go and you look at a classic Marvel character, there's usually 2 colors on a Marvel character. In these, there's often 3, or we have multiple shades. We have multiple hues of one color area that's going on. It's just terrible visual design. So yes, the woke part may have inspired some of it, but it's really a lack of skill if we're going a layer deep than that. And the fact is that if you're playing something like a hero shooter, you can expect that the players will be playing for a lot of hours. They're not going to want to look at this. No one is interested in seeing these characters on screen for hours and hours at a time. So what happened? Players just chose not to look at them. In the gaming space, graphics really do matter. Often we talk about them in quantitative, not qualitative terms, but in this case, the quality of the graphics really matters, and it really turned a lot of people off. It is probably the main reason why this game failed. And the there's not too much more to add to that. I would like to hear your opinions on some of the visuals. I haven't talked to a single person who thought that the character designs were good, that were interested or excited about these characters in like a meaningful or real way. Every single person that I have talked to has been kind of flabbergasted by the terrible designs. It's like they made kind of a dollar store ripoff of Guardians of the Galaxy meets something like Overwatch. It was really, really badly done. But that leads me to reason number 2 that Concord failed, and that's because it was in a live service genre, and it was in a live service genre that may have been hot 8 years ago, but isn't quite as hot today. And the way that live service genres work is really important because you have to be really, really, really good. Your game has to be amazing in order to enter a saturated and fully mature genre in the live service area and be able to be successful. And that's because of the way players tend to play live service games, as far as the data that I've seen. If we look at World of Warcraft as an example, lots of companies were wanting to get into the MMO space back in like 2010 through 2015 because of the success of World of Warcraft. It had 10 or 12 million subscribers paying $15 a month for that game. It's like it's printing money. So clearly what we should be doing is we should be making MMOs so that we can have 10 or 12 million subscribers. You guys know the flaw in thinking. It's line goes up. Line does not always go up. The fact is that once the genre is mature, the MMO genre is mature, in order to attract players to an MMO, you have to get them to stop playing the other game. So your game has to be better than WoW, and it has to be so much better than WoW that people are going to abandon all the skills that they've learned in WoW, all the friends that they've made in WoW in order to play your game. And I know from experience, it was extremely difficult to get anyone that I played WoW with to try out any other game. That's the nature of the MMO genre, but all the live service genres are going to be like that. And that includes the hero shooter genre. For somebody to quit playing Overwatch that they've dumped years into, they have, they're working on leaderboards, they have friends that they play with. For them to stop playing Overwatch and start playing Concord would have to not just be a little bit better than Overwatch. It would have to be so much better than Overwatch that everybody was going to switch to it. That the gameplay experience was like night and day better than Overwatch for you to be able to enter that space and take players away from it. So it's entering into a live service genre that's mature and saturated. And the fact is that most players don't play more than one live service game in a particular genre. If they're playing a MOBA, maybe they're playing Dota 2, maybe they're playing like League of Legends or something, but they're probably not playing both. At least that's what I've gathered. So for you to enter that space, you have to pull players away from the game that they're currently playing and get them to focus on your game. And the fact is, Concord was just not good enough to do that. It wasn't good enough in terms of the graphics. You look at the gameplay, of course now we can't play it to see, but because it's offline, but all the gameplay samples that I saw, it wasn't bad, but it was not good enough to make somebody want to quit the hero shooter that they were playing somewhere else and then hop into Concord. It just was not good enough for that space. The reality is, when it comes to like live service genres, you're probably not going to grow the pie. You're probably not going to get a lot of people into the genre who aren't already in it, especially if you are dealing with what is number 3 on my list, which is a new IP, a new intellectual property. Unlike the Marvel hero shooter that's coming out, you are starting at ground zero for the content that you're going to put there, the characters, the world, any kind of stories that you want to tell in it. In fact, Concord, if they had had some sort of campaign like Call of Duty, that would have gone a long way towards making their world be alive enough that players might care about the heroes that they're playing as. But it's a new IP, so you just see this zany crew of characters and you're like, well, I don't know anything about them and I don't care about them. They just look stupid, right? Whereas if you're going to play a Marvel game, you might be a fan of the Hulk, you might be a fan of Doctor Strange, you might be a fan of Iron Man. Each of those characters has their own movies, their own comics. They have decades of history. They have decades of backstory for fans to grab onto and to say, this is my favorite character. This is the character I want to play as in this game. So when you have an established IP, if you're licensing something like Marvel Avengers or Marvel superheroes, you already have a built-in fan base. That fan base is going to hype up the game. They're going to talk about it. When Overwatch 2 was released, yeah, it deleted Overwatch 1. We don't need to get into that, but it had Overwatch 1, so people knew everything about Overwatch 1, and they were going to be interested in Overwatch 2. The hype was going to build itself. If you come out with StarCraft 3, or Warcraft 4, you have this big game base or player base that's going to talk about it, that's going to be fans of that IP to hype it up and be interested in it. You can have people come back to play Warcraft 4 who haven't played an RTS in decades. Maybe Warcraft 3 was the last RTS they played. They'd be interested maybe in playing Warcraft 4. So you would be growing the pie because you're bringing in people who are interested in the IP, maybe if they're not really interested in the genre. So the Marvel hero shooter, I think it's Marvel Rivals or something, that one has a chance to actually grow that pie. Concord is not going to do that. Concord is going for the genre space. And just kind of backing up to number 2, this is different if it's a single player game. People who play a lot of single player games, which is most gamers, there's gamers who never play single player games, I guess, but most people who play single player games, they buy and play more than one single player game. If they're excited about a new single player game, they buy it, they play it. They may buy 2 games that come out at the same time, play one and the other, switch back and forth, drop one, pick up the other. There's no limit to what they're going to do, and they're not limited to the number of games they're going to play or they're going to buy in a given year. But if you're in the live service genre, they are. So if you're doing a new IP in a live service genre, it's got to be so good. And Concord was just nowhere near, it was pretty much dead on arrival. It was just nowhere near the quality that it needed to be to pull players away from Overwatch or away from Apex Legends. It was nowhere near the game quality to pull players from that. It was not visually interesting enough to excite any players that might want to enter that space. And they weren't dealing with an IP where they could pull in into that genre space any kinds of extra fans. So it was almost guaranteed to be dead on arrival, especially when you consider the costs. Is that as a live service game, and this is my conclusion, there's an ongoing cost to running servers and running the game. So your ROI, your return on investment, can sometimes be measured in how long it takes for you to get back to zero. How long does it take for you to recoup the investment and then be in the black, start making extra money? And if you were looking at the way that Concord launched, the answer was it will never get back to black. It will never make its money back. It was just going to be impossible for you to recoup the investment given the limitations of the genre, the fact that it was a live service game, the fact that it was a new IP. It would have taken long enough that it might as well just never make its money back. You would have been running those servers and going further into the red for a long time before you could ever build up any kind of momentum to maybe even pay for the servers, much less like get back to black. So Sony made the decision to take it offline. Now, why? If it was a single player game, the optionality would probably be just sell the game, and eventually you'll sell enough copies to maybe make up for the cost of the game, even if it's a bit of a flop. Maybe a couple years from now, the game, you continue to sell enough copies of the game that it kind of makes up for the loss. But you can't do that with a live service game. So what I think they may be doing is what Disney Plus has done for at least the Willow series and some other streaming services have done, where they've produced movies and never released them. I think there was a Wile E. Coyote movie that got made and is basically going to be destroyed as a tax write-off. And if you're not in the book business, you may not realize that destroying old inventory is a means of kind of helping with your taxes. It's one of the ways that the publishing industry stays afloat, is they destroy all of their books that they don't sell. So if they don't sell books after a certain amount of time, they destroy the books and then they write it down as a loss. So most of the books that you see in the bookstore are going to get thrown away or recycled, turned into toilet paper or burned or something, and the publisher will write it off as a loss. So this is the same thing. What Disney did is they took the Willow series off. They wrote down the cost of the Willow series as a loss on their taxes. So Sony could possibly do the same thing here. I'm not a tax lawyer and I don't know their situation, but my guess is if it's possible to do that, they would do that to just help the overall health of the company. Yeah, you write off a big loss. You write it down as basically destroyed inventory, extra inventory that you destroyed and couldn't sell. This all goes back to a court case called the Thor Power Tool court case, which you can Google and find a little bit of some interesting facts about that. But yeah, that might be what they do, is they just write it down. For the taxes, they write it off as a loss, and that will be the way that they kind of pay for the game. But in order to do that, they had to at least like manufacture the discs to then destroy them. They had to like put it online to then have it be destroyed. Versus if they just canceled it and never released it, I don't know if they'd be able to write it down as a loss or not. Maybe they would. So if that was an easier thing, they probably should have done that. But either way, that's what I am going to guess they might be doing with this. And so what did we get out of it? We got some interesting content. We got some interesting ways to look at how the business of games works and how something can fail can, I think, be instructive for other business practices, right? If I was going to write a book and I was going to direct it at a really saturated market, and then when it didn't sell anything because it's not better than all the books in that genre, that would kind of point to this kind of failure. Would make a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot of things that you can get out of the failure of Concord. We did get a pretty cool controller, and that was the only way that I knew about the game. The marketing completely missed me. I saw a cool looking controller and I thought, oh, there's a cool 80s inspired game that goes with this. First I thought it was a brand like Gucci or something, but I was like, no, it's a game. So I looked it up and I was like, this looks really stupid. And I didn't buy the game, and maybe you could buy the controller still and have kind of a cool controller design to remember the big flop that was Concord. And someone would look at that controller in 20 years and be like, what was Concord? And then you could make up whatever story you want, but you'd be like, oh, it's this game that was out for 2 weeks and then Sony destroyed it for a tax write-off. But I have the controller and it still looks cool. So anyway, guys, leave your thoughts down below about this failure and what you think the root cause was. Eventually there's kind of an inertia where you've been developing the game for so long, you kind of have to bring it to market, even if the marketing conditions have changed between when you thought up the game and when you were actually able to release it. So I kind of understand how something like this can end up happening. But anyway, leaving your thoughts down below. Be interested to read them, and I will see you all next time. Have a great one. Oh, we'll give one more shot of our very poorly designed character. By the way, you can join my Patreon and get a free book every month. I should be plugging this in every video. It'll be linked down below. This month's book is a deep cut. You can't get it by itself on Amazon. It's from the Pulp Rock Anthology. It is called Farewell to Once and Future Kings. So check that out, and I will see you all next time.